The dead woman he buried 7 months ago is alive. She is pregnant, and the moment she sees him, she is not relieved. She is terrified. Dario Vayer put white flowers on her grave. He stood in the rain until his suit was soaked through and his chest had gone hollow. He told himself it was grief. He told himself it would pass. But tonight, under a cracked streetlight on a Bronx side street, she is crouched in filth with her arms wrapped around a swollen belly. And the look in her eyes is not the look of a woman saved. It is the look of a woman who knows the monster standing in front of her. And she is not afraid of his enemies. She is afraid of his house. Hit like and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Stay until the end. It is worth it. The rain started just after 9 and it did not stop. It came down the way October rain always came down in the Bronx. Not clean, not gentle, just cold and relentless, filling the gutters with black water and cigarette wrappers and whatever the city had decided to throw away that week. The streetlights on Morris Avenue turned everything a sick amber color, the kind of light that made faces look older than they were and shadows look deeper than they should. Dario Vayer walked out of the back entrance of Carmelo's social club at 9:47, and he did it alone, which was already a violation of his own rules. He had 3 men waiting on the street outside. He had a car idling at the corner with a driver who had been with him for 11 years. He had a protocol, one he had designed himself, one he enforced for every member of his organization down to the lowest runner, that said no principal moves without minimum 2 escorts within arm's reach. He walked out alone anyway. The meeting inside had lasted 3 hours, and it had produced nothing except a headache and the particular kind of fury that settles behind a man's eyes when he realizes he has been wasting time on people who are incapable of telling him the truth. Bruno Calder's representatives had sat across the table with their hands folded and their faces composed, and they had denied everything: the dock workers, the skimmed shipments, the 2 Vayer men who had gone missing from the Red Hook operation 6 weeks ago. Denied it all with the smooth confidence of men who believed they were untouchable. Dario had listened. He had not responded. He had let the silence go on until it became something physical in the room, something that pressed against the chest, and then he had stood up and left without shaking a single hand. That was the meeting. Now he was walking in the rain because he needed 30 seconds of air that did not smell like other people's lies. He turned off Morris Avenue onto a side street, a narrow one, the kind of street that existed in the Bronx in a state of permanent neglect. The pavement cracked, a dumpster pushed against the wall of a shuttered laundromat, a single functioning light mounted above a fire escape landing halfway up the building. The rain hammered the dumpster lid with a tinny, rhythmic sound. That was when he heard the woman scream. Not a sharp scream, not the kind that pierced. It was lower than that, a sound that had been going on for a while before it reached the point where the body simply could not stay quiet anymore. It was the sound of someone who had already endured a great deal and had just reached the limit of what endurance could absorb. Dario stopped walking. There were 2 of them. He could see that immediately. Big men, not professionals, the kind of muscle that got hired for simple jobs because they were cheap and did not ask questions. One had the woman by the collar of her coat, and the coat was soaked through and torn at the shoulder, and the man was using his grip to keep her from falling while his partner put a boot into her side. They were laughing. Not hard, not like it was the funniest thing they had ever done, but the loose, distracted laughter of men who were doing something they did not consider particularly significant. The woman had her arms wrapped around her midsection. Even from 20 feet away, even in that ruined amber light, Dario could see why. She was pregnant, visibly, heavily pregnant. He was moving before he had consciously made the decision to move. What happened next took 11 seconds. Dario had been counting seconds in situations like this since he was 19 years old, and the habit had never left him. 11 seconds was enough. The first man turned around when he heard footsteps and opened his mouth to say something threatening, and Dario broke his nose with a single straight punch before the words arrived. The second man was slower to react. He had the woman's collar still in his fist, and he had to let go of it to reach for whatever was in his waistband, and that pause was the whole difference. Dario took his wrist, turned it in a direction wrists do not go, and when the man went down, Dario put his knee into the man's face on the way to the pavement. Both men stayed down. Dario stood over them for a moment, breathing through his nose, watching them to confirm they were not getting back up immediately. Then he turned. The woman had pressed herself against the brick wall of the laundromat. She was holding herself up with one hand flat against the surface, her other arm still wrapped around her belly, and she was not looking at the two men on the ground. She was looking at him. He almost did not recognize her. That was the honest truth of it, and it was a truth that would stay with him for a long time afterward, in the quiet hours when the mind revisits things it has not finished processing. He almost did not recognize her because the last time he had seen her face, it had been in a photograph. The one they had placed on the table at her memorial, the one somebody had chosen because she was smiling in it. The one he had not been able to look at for more than a few seconds before he had to look away. The face looking at him now was not smiling. It was gaunt, sharpened by months of something he could not yet name. The skin around her jaw drawn tight in a way that changed the geometry of her features. There was a cut above her left eyebrow that had not been cleaned properly, dried dark at the edges. Her lips were cracked and pale, but it was her eyes. He knew those eyes. He had known those eyes for 4 years. He would have known those eyes in complete darkness. Miran. He said her name and the word came out wrong, tot. Too quiet, too stripped of everything, the way words sometimes emerge from a place in the chest that has not been used in a long time. She flinched. That was the thing that hit him harder than the recognition itself. She flinched when he said her name, and then she looked at the mouth of the alley, calculating, and he understood in that moment that she was measuring whether she could run. From him. She was measuring whether she could run from him. Miran. He said it again, differently this time, and he kept his hands visible and he did not move toward her. It's me. You know it's me. I know who you are. Her voice was rough, abraded, nothing like the voice he remembered. That's why I'm asking you not to call anyone. I'm not calling anyone. Your men are at the end of the street. They don't know I'm back here. He watched her face. How long have you been out here? She didn't answer that. Miran, how long have you been living like this? Don't. The word was sharp, harder than everything else. Don't look at me like that. I don't have time for it. You're hurt. I know I'm hurt. The baby is fine. She said it fast, fierce, her arm tightening around her belly. He's fine. I've been careful. He. The word landed in Dario's chest like something physical. He moved then, slowly, and she pressed back against the wall, but she did not run. Maybe because she could see that running was not really an option anymore. Maybe because some part of her had reached the end of what it could sustain on its own. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, and she grabbed his wrist. Her grip was weak. She was weak. He could feel it, the lack of strength behind the motion, the effort it cost her. But the look on her face was not weak. Don't, she said. Don't call Nico. He stared at her. Don't call him. Don't tell him I'm here. Don't let him know anything. Her fingers tightened on his wrist. Dario, please. There are things you don't know, and I need you to listen to me before you do anything, before you call anyone. Anyone. He looked at her face. He looked at the desperation there, the exhaustion underneath it, the particular quality of fear that comes not from not knowing what is going to happen, but from knowing exactly what is going to happen, and having already lived with that knowledge for a long time. He put the phone back in his pocket. Okay, he said. Okay. No calls. The relief that crossed her face lasted about 1 second before it collapsed back into something harder and more cautious. She had learned, whatever had happened to her in the last 7 months, not to trust relief. He helped her out of the alley. She let him reluctantly, leaning against his arm with the stiff pride of someone who hated needing the help. The two men on the ground did not move. Dario stepped over the one with the broken nose without looking down. He took her to the car the long way, through the side streets, and he got in the back with her before he spoke to the driver. Callan, he said. Not the estate. Callan's facility. The driver, a lean man in his 50s with gray at his temples, looked in the rearview mirror for exactly 1 second and then looked away. Yes, sir. Miran was watching the window. She had not let go of her belly. Outside, the Bronx moved past in the rain. Lit bodegas, a group of men under an awning, a church with one broken window covered in cardboard. And she watched it all with the particular intensity of someone who has spent months learning every detail of an environment in order to survive it. He thinks I'm dead, she said, without turning from the window. Everyone thinks you're dead. Nico knows I'm not. Dario was quiet for a moment. What did you say? She turned then. She looked at him directly, and he could see how much the act of saying this out loud cost her. Not because she doubted it, but because saying it meant it was real in a different way. It meant she had to trust him with it, and trusting had become a thing she had to force herself to do. Nico Relin, she said, your underboss, your most trusted man, the one who has been with you since you were 22 years old. She held his gaze. He is the one who put the device in my car. The silence in the back of that car was total. Bomski. Dr. Callan Rowe had run his private clinic beneath a veterinary practice in Yonkers for 9 years, and in those 9 years he had developed a reliable professional detachment about the kinds of cases that arrived at his back door in the middle of the night. He had treated gunshot wounds, knife wounds, burns, fractures sustained under circumstances that were better not examined too carefully. He had operated with inadequate lighting and improvised instruments. He had kept men alive who probably should not have survived and had watched other men die despite everything he knew how to do. He had never been genuinely shaken by any of it. When Dario carried Miran Ashford through his back door at 11:15 that night, Callan Rowe was shaken. Not because he recognized her, though he did immediately, in a way that required him to stop speaking mid-sentence and simply stare for a moment. Not because of the pregnancy, though that complicated the situation in multiple clinical directions simultaneously. He was shaken because of the specific combination of injuries he cataloged in the first 60 seconds of examination. The story those injuries told not about a single event, but about a sustained period of time. 3 cracked ribs, at least 2 of which had been healing without treatment. Hypothermia, mild but real. Malnutrition, not acute starvation but the steady grinding kind, weeks of insufficient intake that had stripped weight from places the body defends longest. Bruising on her forearms and shoulders in overlapping stages of yellow and purple and fresh red. This was not a woman who had been hurt tonight. This was a woman who had been surviving for a long time. How far along, he said, because that was where to start. 33 weeks, Miran said. She was lying on the examination table and she was staring at the ceiling and she was breathing with the careful deliberateness of someone managing pain. You've had prenatal care? A pause. Some. Free clinics. When I could. Callan looked at Dario, who was standing against the wall with his arms at his sides in the posture of a man who has decided that standing absolutely still is the only thing he can safely do right now. Wait outside, Callan said. I'm staying. You're in my facility, and she's my patient. Wait outside. Another long pause, and then Dario walked out, and the door closed behind him, and Callan turned back to Miran. Can you tell me about the ribs? 2 weeks ago. A man in a shelter. I fought back. And before that, these older bruises. Different situations, different times. Her voice was flat, matter-of-fact, the voice of someone who has processed these events well past the point of emotional availability. I'm more worried about the baby than any of it. The baby's heart rate is strong, Callan said, because that was true and she needed to hear it. He's positioned correctly. He's measuring small but not critically. He pressed gently at her abdomen, reading the resistance of the muscles, watching her face. Has he been moving regularly? Yes. He moves a lot. For the first time, something shifted in her expression. Not softness exactly, but a crack in the flatness, a brief acknowledgement of something that was not pain. He's restless. That's good. I know. Callan worked through the examination methodically, and she let him, answering his questions in the same clipped, stripped-down register, volunteering nothing extra. He started an IV. Fluids, glucose, a carefully selected antibiotic for the rib wound that had been improperly cleaned. And he adjusted the examination light, and he did not ask the questions that were not his to ask. When he stepped out into the hallway, Dario was standing exactly where Callan had expected him to stand, 3 feet from the door, facing it. She's stable, Callan said. The baby is stable. She needs rest. She needs nutrition. She needs monitoring. And she should not be moved for at least 48 hours. Dario said nothing. The rib fractures are old. Some of the bruising is old. Callan kept his voice clinical, professional, the tone he used to deliver information without attaching weight to it. Whatever happened to her, it did not all happen tonight. I know, Dario said. I'm not asking. Good. Callan went back inside, and Dario stood in the hallway, and the fluorescent light above him hummed the way those lights always hummed, a sound like something suppressed, and he stood there for a long time. She woke at 3 a.m. Dario was sitting in the chair against the wall, still in his rain-damp suit, and he had not slept. And when she opened her eyes and found him there, she did not look surprised. She looked like a woman who had been expecting something difficult and had decided to stop postponing it. "How do you feel?" he said. "Better than I did." She pushed herself up carefully, mindful of the IV line, and she adjusted the pillow behind her, and she looked at him with clear eyes, the medication taking the edge off the pain without blurring anything she needed to think with. "I need to tell you everything before morning. You told me Nico—" "I know what I told you. I need you to understand how I know." She folded her hands in her lap. "Give me that. Just listen." He leaned forward in the chair, elbows on his knees, and he listened. She had been at the Arthur Avenue office in late March, she said. The satellite office, the one the organization used for the kind of administrative work that needed to be done in person, but quietly. The books that required careful management, the communication logs that required careful deletion. She had been there alone, or she had believed herself to be alone, because the visit was unscheduled, and she had come early, and the only person who knew she had planned to go was Nico, who had suggested it to her himself, who had told her it would be a good time to review the quarterly accounts because the main staff would be out. She had arrived to find the building not empty. Nico was there. He was in the back office, the one with the window that looked out over the parking structure, and the door was not quite closed, and he was on a call that he did not know she could hear. She described what she had heard the way someone describes a thing they have rehearsed in their mind many times, precisely, without embellishment, selecting words carefully. A federal case number, a handler's name, details of the November shipment routing that no one outside the inner circle should have possessed. Nico's voice, measured and unhurried, the voice of a man conducting a transaction he had been conducting for a long time. She had stood in the outer office for approximately 90 seconds, she said, before she understood completely what she was hearing. Then she had left. She had not gone back to the car she had driven to Arthur Avenue. She had walked 3 blocks and taken a cab, and she had spent the ride home with her hands pressed flat against her thighs, trying to think through what to do with what she knew. She had not called Dario immediately. She had decided she needed to be certain, needed to think, and she had intended to tell him that evening. She had intended to tell him that evening. "The car that blew up," Dario said, "was the car I drove to Arthur Avenue," she said, "the one I left in the parking structure when I took the cab." She looked at him steadily. "Nico must have watched me leave. He must have realized from the way I left that I had heard something, and he got to the car before I came back for it. But you didn't come back for it. I sent someone to pick it up the next morning, a man who worked for us." She paused. "His name was Terrence. He had 2 daughters." The silence sat between them for a moment. "Terrence died in the car," Dario said. "I know." Her voice did not change. The flatness in it was not coldness. He had known her long enough to recognize the difference. It was control. She was keeping the grief compressed because if she let it expand now, in this room, she would not be able to finish what she needed to say. "I didn't know he was going to pick it up that morning. I had asked someone else to do it, and the assignment got passed along. I didn't know until I saw the news." That was the day of the memorial. "I know when it was." He stood up. He could not sit still for this part. He walked to the wall and put one hand against it, and he looked at the floor. And he thought about Terrence, who had in fact had 2 daughters, 8 and 11, and who had been with the organization for 7 years, and who had taken a car errand on a Tuesday morning and had never come home. "Why didn't you come to me?" he said. He kept his voice level. "Because Nico was handling your security." She said it simply, without accusation. "He was handling your communications, your location protocols, your meeting schedules. I did not know who he had already compromised. I didn't know who was reporting to him. If I had walked back into that world and Nico had found out I was alive before I could get to you directly." She stopped. "And I was pregnant. I had just confirmed it. I couldn't—" Another stop, shorter this time. "I made a decision. I kept him safe. That was all I could do." Dario turned around. "You spent 7 months on the street," he said. "Yes?" Alone. Yes. Pregnant. Yes. Her chin came up slightly. I am aware of the conditions. I was there. He moved back to the chair and he sat down heavily, and he put his face in his hands for a moment. Not a long moment, just long enough to do something with what was happening in his chest, which was considerable. Then he took his hands away and he looked at her. A boy, he said. Something moved in her face. Yes. You're sure? One of the free clinics had an ultrasound machine. The technician was kind. A pause. He's healthy, Dario. Despite everything, he's stubborn and healthy. He was quiet for a moment. That's mine, he said. It was not a question. Don't insult me. I'm not insulting you. I'm saying it out loud because I need to hear it said out loud. He looked at her. He's mine. He's yours, she said. Dario stepped out of the room at 4 a.m. and closed the door behind him and stood in the hallway. Nico Roland was standing at the end of the corridor. He had a paper cup of coffee in his hand and he was wearing a gray jacket, and his expression was the one it always was. Composed, attentive, the look of a man who was present and alert and waiting to be useful. Nico Roland at 51 looked the same as Nico Roland had looked at 35, which was part of what made him valuable and part of what had made him invisible. He had a face that did not change, and faces that did not change were very easy to trust. Heard there was something going on, Nico said. He held out the second cup he was carrying. Thought you might want this. Dario looked at the cup. He did not take it. How did you hear? Marco called me, said you came in through the back with someone and told him not to follow. Nico set the second cup on the small shelf mounted beside the supply cabinet. You all right? The meeting run long? Meeting was fine. Calder's people? Denied everything, as expected. Nico nodded, the slow nod of a man who has been in the business long enough to find this unsurprising. We should move on the docks before the end of the week, while they're still feeling comfortable. He tilted his head. I've been looking at the access points on the Red Hook structure. There are 3 windows where we could... Nico, the man stopped. Whose phone are you carrying tonight? A pause. Short, but present. My regular phone. Why? Not the burner. I carry the burner when we're... Give me the burner, Dario said. The hallway was narrow. The fluorescent light hummed. Nico's eyes did something very small and very fast, a recalculation happening behind them, visible only because Dario had been watching those eyes for 29 years and knew every expression they were capable of making. I don't have it on me tonight, Nico said. I told you, I only carry it. March 26, Dario said. Silence. Arthur Avenue office, back office. Window facing the parking structure. Dario took 1 step forward. Walk me through where you were on March 26th. The coffee cup in Nico's hand stayed steady. That was the thing about men who had been doing this for a long time. They kept their hands steady, even when their mind was moving very fast. Nico's mind was moving very fast. Dario could see it in the way the man's eyes stayed absolutely still, which was the tell, the thing he did when he was calculating. I was at the Avenue office in March, Nico said. Multiple times. Can you be more specific about... She heard you, Dario said. The coffee cup stopped being steady. It was a small thing. A tremor, barely visible, gone in half a second. But it was enough. Nico set the cup on the shelf beside the other one, and he straightened, and he looked at Dario with the expression of a man who has made a decision. Whatever you think you know. Mirren heard you, Dario said. On the phone in the back office. She heard a case number and a handler name, and she heard you read out the November routing. He watched Nico's face. She left without you seeing her. You figured it out because she left the car. You got to the car before she did. Nico said nothing. She didn't come back for the car herself, Dario said. Terrence came back for the car. Terrence had 2 daughters. You need to listen to me. Nico's voice shifted, tightened, moved from composed to urgent without going through any of the usual intermediate stages. What I did because I had no choice. They had 3 years of material on me. 3 years, things that would have ended not just me, but this entire organization. Things that would have given them grounds to freeze every account and seize every property and take down everyone connected to the Veyer name. I did what I did to survive. The same thing you would have done. You killed Miran. I tried to... He stopped. Say it. It wasn't personal. The sound that came out of Dario then was not quite a laugh. It came from somewhere low and quiet, from a place that had been building pressure for a very long time, and it died quickly. She lived in a shelter. She dug food out of dumpsters. She hid from the people who should have protected her because the man who controlled my security was hunting her. He took another step forward. She did it for 7 months because she was carrying my son, and she knew that if you found out she was alive, you would finish the job. Nico reached for the inside of his jacket. He was fast. He had always been fast. It was one of the reasons Dario had valued him. The combination of fastness and steadiness. The quality that made him reliable in situations where reliable was the only thing that mattered. But Dario was already moving. He had the gun pressed under Nico's jaw before Nico's hand had cleared the holster. The pressure was firm and direct, and Nico went completely still, the way all men went still when they felt that specific kind of contact in that specific location, the body understanding before the mind had finished processing what the consequences of movement would be. Don't, Dario said. Nico's hand stopped. Take it out slow and put it on the shelf. He did. They stood like that for a moment, in the fluorescent light, in the narrow hallway of a clinic under a veterinary practice in Yonkers, the hum of the light above them, the distant sound of Miran's monitor through the closed door, the 2 paper cups of coffee on the shelf. I can still help you, Nico said. His voice was very controlled. I know everything they have. I know every name in their file. I can give you more than you could ever take from me by... She ate out of garbage cans, Dario said. She slept in shelters. She had nobody. She had nothing, because of you. The pressure of the barrel increased slightly. My son almost died because of you, multiple times, in the cold, alone, in a shelter where a man broke 3 of her ribs. Dario, think about what Her name is Miran, Dario said. Say her name. A pause. Say it. Miran, Nico said. She's alive, Dario said. She's in the room behind me, and she is the mother of my son. And she spent 7 months in the cold, in the dark, in the hunger, because of a decision you made in a back office on Arthur Avenue. His voice was not raised. It was, if anything, quieter than it had been. There is no version of this where you walk out of here. Dario! The single shot was very loud in the narrow hallway. Then it was very quiet. Nico Relin slid down the wall and the 2 paper cups of coffee sat untouched on the shelf above him, and the fluorescent light hummed and Dario stood with the gun at his side and looked down at the man he had trusted for 29 years. He stood there for a long time. Then he heard the monitor through the door, the steady rhythmic sound of it. 2 heartbeats, one strong, one smaller but present, persistent, stubbornly present in the way Miran had said, stubborn and healthy despite everything. He put the gun in his jacket. He pulled out his phone. He called Marco first. Clean up, he said, Callan's hallway. And then I need you to start pulling the organization logs for the last 3 years. Everything Nico touched, every route, every contact, every account he had access to. He paused. And Marco, do it quiet. Nobody knows what we're doing until I say otherwise. Understood, Marco said. Dario hung up. He stood for another moment in the hallway with his hand on the door to Miran's room. He could hear the monitor, he could hear her breathing, slightly uneven in the way of someone sleeping lightly, someone whose sleep had not been deep or safe in a very long time. He did not go in. Not yet. He had calls to make. He had a 29-year infiltration to begin dismantling. He had an empire to audit in the dark before morning came, and the people inside it began to understand that something had fundamentally changed. But before he moved away from the door, he put his hand flat against the surface of it, just for a moment. The wood was cool and solid under his palm. She was alive. His son was alive, and by morning he would know exactly how deep the rot went, and exactly how many men inside his own house would not survive the finding out. He took his hand off the door. He walked down the hallway, stepping past Nico Relin without looking down, and he pulled out his phone and he began to make the calls that would change everything. In the last dark hours before an October dawn broke over the Bronx, and the city woke up and had no idea yet what was coming. Somewhere in the building, the monitor kept its rhythm. 2 heartbeats, steady, persistent, alive. And in the room where the dead woman breathed and the unborn son moved in his sleep, something waited that no one in the Veyer organization had been prepared for. A witness who had survived. And a reckoning that had been 7 months in the making. The calls took 4 hours. Dario made them from the small supply room at the end of the hallway, sitting on a metal stool with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled to the elbows and the door closed. He had found a legal pad in one of the cabinets, and he used it to write names, not in any organized way, just names as they surfaced. Men who had reported to Nico, men who had been assigned by Nico, men whose positions inside the organization had been created or expanded or protected by Nico over the course of 29 years. The list was longer than he wanted it to be. Marco arrived at 5:15 with 2 other men, both of whom had been with the organization since before Nico's influence had fully metastasized, both of whom Dario had chosen specifically because their loyalty ran to him directly and had never been filtered through anyone else. They handled the hallway efficiently and without comment. Callan came out of the examination room once, looked at what was happening, and went back inside without speaking. He had a gift for that, for understanding precisely what did and did not require his involvement. By 6 in the morning, the hallway was clean and Nico Relin was gone, and the 2 paper cups of coffee had been thrown away, and the only evidence that anything had occurred was a faint discoloration on the baseboard that would require repainting. Marco sat across from Dario in the supply room and put his own notes on the table. 3 years minimum, Marco said. He was a compact man, somewhere in his mid-40s, with the kind of face that did not invite conversation. Flat planes, careful eyes, a mouth that stayed closed when it did not have something specific to say. Maybe 4. The routing changes he pushed through in the first quarter of last year. I thought they were efficiency adjustments. He told me you had approved them personally. I didn't approve them. I know that now. What did the routing changes do? Move the November and February shipments through a different transit point, one that federal surveillance would have had much easier access to. Marco tapped the legal pad in front of him. We haven't been hit yet. That means either the information he gave them wasn't actionable yet, or they were building a larger case and waiting for the right moment to move. Or both. Or both, Marco agreed. Dario looked at the list of names. How many of these men do you trust? Marco looked at the list. He was quiet for a moment. 11. Maybe 12. There were 37 names on the list. The others? I don't know. Some of them may have had no idea. Some of them may have known exactly what they were part of. Marco's jaw tightened slightly. There's no way to know without asking, and asking alerts them. We don't ask, Dario said. We pull the logs first. Every communication Nico had access to for the last 3 years. Every transaction he approved or redirected. Every meeting he scheduled on my behalf. He picked up the legal pad. And we do it before anyone in that building starts their morning and notices he hasn't checked in. That's a 6-hour window, maybe less. Then we start now. Marco stood. He picked up his notes and he paused at the door. The woman, he said. Miran. What about her? The men who were there when you brought her in, they saw her. I know. They're going to talk. Not out of disloyalty, just because I know, Dario said. Let them talk. By the time it matters, we'll have finished what we're doing. He looked at Marco. She stays here until Callan clears her. Nobody comes to this facility except you and the 2 men you brought tonight. Nobody else knows this address. Understood. Marco left. Dario sat alone in the supply room for a few minutes. He looked at the list of names. He looked at the window, which showed nothing but a concrete wall. The facility was underground. Its only natural light a pair of high, narrow windows in the main examination room that looked out at ground level onto the parking lot of the veterinary practice above. He thought about Miran eating out of a garbage can. He made himself think about it specifically, in detail, not as an abstraction. He did that deliberately, the way he sometimes made himself look at difficult things directly instead of from an angle, because looking directly was the only way to make sure the anger stayed clean and purposeful instead of diffuse and wasteful. Then he stood up, put on his jacket, and went back to work. Miran woke at 7 to find a woman she did not recognize sitting in the chair against the wall. She was perhaps 60, with the gray hair pulled back severely and the posture of someone who had spent decades doing physically demanding work. She was knitting, actually knitting, with pale blue yarn and small metal needles. And she did not look up immediately when Mirren stirred. "You're awake," the woman said, without looking up. "Good. There's broth on the table. Drink it slowly or you'll be sick." Mirren looked at the small folding table that had appeared beside the bed. A covered cup, a sleeve of plain crackers. "Who are you?" Mirren said. "Elena, I work for Dr. Rowe." The woman looked up then, briefly, with the assessing eyes of someone who had done a great deal of patient care and had developed strong opinions about what patients were and were not capable of. "You slept 4 hours. That's not enough, but it's better than nothing. How's the pain?" "Manageable." "Ribs?" "Present." Elena almost smiled. The broth. Myron reached for the cup. Her hand was steadier than it had been last night, the IV fluids doing their work. The worst edge of the exhaustion filed down. She drank slowly, as instructed, and she looked at the ceiling and she listened to the building around her. The hum of the HVAC, the distant sound of voices somewhere deeper in the facility, the particular quality of silence that indicated underground space. "Where is he?" she said. "Mr. Weyer has been working since approximately 5 o'clock this morning." Elena set down her knitting and looked at Myron directly. "He has not slept. He has eaten nothing that I am aware of. He has made a number of phone calls that I have not been privy to." A pause. "He has also checked on you twice, both times standing in the doorway for approximately 30 seconds without entering." Mirren looked at the door. "He did not want to wake you," Elena said, and returned to her knitting. The first confrontation happened at 9:43. Dario was in Callan's office, a small room adjacent to the main corridor, cluttered with medical reference texts and the particular organized chaos of a man who worked alone and had stopped pretending otherwise, when his phone rang with a number he recognized as belonging to Sal Ferretti. Sal Ferretti was 63 years old and ran the Weyer organization's legitimate front operations, 3 restaurants, a commercial real estate holding company, and a waste management contract that covered most of the lower Westchester corridor. He was not a violent man, had never been, had in fact been brought into the organization specifically because he could navigate the legitimate world with complete conviction, because he had no tells, because he genuinely believed in the businesses he ran, even though everyone understood what those businesses were adjacent to. He was also, Dario had confirmed in the last 2 hours, one of the men whose communication lines ran directly through Nico. Dario answered. "Where is he?" Sal said. No greeting. The voice of a man who had been trying other numbers first. "Who?" "Don't do that, Nico. He missed the 7 o'clock check-in, and he's not answering his phone, and 2 of my people are telling me there was some kind of incident at a facility in Yonkers last night." A pause. And in the pause, Dario could hear Sal breathing, could hear the effort it cost him to keep the voice measured. "I need to know what's happening." "What facility in Yonkers?" Dario said. "Dario, I'm asking you a question, Sal. What facility, and who told you about it?" A longer pause this time. "Manny called me," Sal said. "He said Marco came in overnight with cleanup equipment and 2 men he didn't recognize, and Manny wasn't supposed to be at that location last night. He was doing a secondary check. Nico asked him to start running secondaries on the Yonkers properties, said it was your directive." "It wasn't my directive." The silence on the line had a different quality now. Dario could hear Sal processing this, could almost feel the man's understanding shifting and reorganizing itself around the new information. Sal was not stupid. He had survived in this world for 30 years by being very good at reading what was actually being said underneath what was being said. "Dario," Sal said carefully, "is Nico." "Come to the facility," Dario said. "Come alone. Come now." He hung up. He set the phone on Callan's desk and looked at it for a moment. Then he picked it up again and called Marco. "Manny Reyes," he said. "Find out where he is and keep him there. Don't tell him why." "Already on it," Marco said. "He went home after he called Ferretti. We have eyes on his building." "Good. 2 more things," Marco said. "The federal case number that Mirren gave you. I ran it against our contacts. It's real. It's a RICO investigation that's been open for 2 years and 8 months. The lead agency is FBI. The field office is Lower Manhattan." Dario absorbed this. "And the second thing, the Red Hook men, the 2 who disappeared 6 weeks ago." A pause. I found a transit record that puts both of them at a federal processing facility in New Jersey 11 days after they disappeared. The line was quiet. They're in custody, Dario said. Yes. Nico handed them over. That would be my read. Were they... He stopped. Do we know if they cooperated? Not yet. Find out. He pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of his nose. And Marco, how many people know about the 2 men being missing? Inner circle, 6, 7 people. All of whom Nico had access to. Yes. Dario ended the call. He sat in Callan's chair and he looked at the wall of medical texts, and he understood, in a way that was both abstract and entirely concrete, that he was not looking at a betrayal. He was looking at a dismantling, a careful, patient, methodical dismantling of everything he had built, executed over years by a man who had sat at his right hand and eaten at his table and stood at his shoulder at his wife's memorial. Not a betrayal, an erasure. He had almost been erased, and he had not known, and the only reason he had not been erased was that a woman had chosen to survive in the cold and the dark instead of walking back into the fire. He stood up and went to find Mirren. She was sitting up in bed with the broth finished and the crackers half gone when he came in, and she looked better than she had. Not well, not restored, but present in a way she had not been last night, the eyes sharper and the color slightly returned to her face. She looked at him when he entered, and she did the thing she sometimes used to do when she was reading him. The brief, focused attention that moved across his face, the way a hand moves across a document, taking inventory. You didn't sleep, she said. No. You should. Later. He pulled the chair close to the bed and sat. I need to go through everything again, more specifically. All right? The case number you heard. Do you remember it exactly? She told him. He wrote it down. The handler's name. She told him that too. And you're certain it was a handler, not another contact, You're certain federal. He said my handler specifically. The words were, my handler wants confirmation of the November routing before the end of the week. Those were the words. Her voice was steady, not recitative, the steadiness of someone who has replayed a recording so many times it has become part of the architecture of their memory. I've repeated those words to myself every day for 7 months. I have not forgotten a single one of them. Dario looked at what he had written. The routing confirmation. That means the November shipment was supposed to be the move. The point where they had enough to act. I assumed the same thing. November is 3 weeks away. The room was quiet for a moment. So they were close, Mirren said. They were 3 weeks away from having everything they needed. He set the notepad on his knee. Nico was going to deliver the November shipment to federal surveillance, let it be intercepted, and use the interception as the basis for a full RICO prosecution. He looked at her. By December, I would have been in a federal facility, and the organization would have been under asset seizure, and every man in the inner circle would have been facing charges. And Nico? Would have testified, received his deal, disappeared. Mirren said nothing for a moment. She looked at the far wall. And the 2 men in Red Hook, the ones who went missing. Already in federal custody. Her jaw tightened. Since when? 11 days after they disappeared. He watched her face. I don't know yet whether they've cooperated. If they've been in custody for 6 weeks and they haven't cooperated yet, they may have. He kept his voice flat, not dismissive, but honest. Or they may be holding out. Or the federal case doesn't need them. They may be insurance rather than primary evidence. What does that mean for the November timeline? It means even without Nico to deliver the shipment confirmation, the case may be far enough along to move. He looked at her. I need to know how much they already have. And to know that, I need to know exactly what Nico gave them and when. I don't know that. I only know what I heard in March. I know. He stood. But I know someone who might. Sal Ferretti arrived at the facility at 10:27. He came alone, as instructed, driving himself in a gray sedan that had no business being driven by a man who owned 3 restaurants and a real estate company, but which communicated in the particular language of this world that Sal Ferretti understood he was coming to a meeting that was not a conversation between equals. Dario met him in the main corridor. Sal was a thick man, built in the substantial way of men who had been athletic in youth and had carried the frame of it into age without maintaining the conditioning. He had a good face, honest looking, which was the specific quality that made him valuable. That look of fundamental straightforwardness that people believed because they wanted to believe it. He was wearing a dark jacket, and he had left whatever he normally carried in the car, which was smart. He looked at Dario, and he did not make any of the usual social noises. "Tell me where Nico is," he said. "Nico is handled," Dario said. The word landed. Sal's face did something complicated. "Handled?" "Yes." "Since when?" "Since last night." Sal was quiet. He put one hand against the wall of the corridor, not leaning, just making contact. The gesture of a man who needed a fixed point while his internal geography shifted. "And you're telling me this because Nico had a line into your operations, 3 years of it, and I need to know what moved through that line." "I didn't know. I'm not accusing you of knowing." Dario's voice was even. "I'm telling you that it happened in your section of the organization, and I need to understand the exposure. That requires your help." Sal removed his hand from the wall. He straightened. He looked at Dario with the eyes of a man who has just been told that a bridge he has been walking across every day for 3 years may not have been structurally sound. "What do you need?" Sal said. "The waste management contract, the lower Westchester corridor." Dario handed him a page from the legal pad. "Specific route numbers, specific dates. Tell me what moved through these routes and when, and whether any of the transit manifests were adjusted in the last 6 months without your direct approval." Sal looked at the page. He took a breath through his nose. "Give me an hour." "You have 40 minutes. Sal looked up. He looked at Dario for a moment with something that might have been resentment if the situation had been different, if there had been any room for resentment in the available space. There wasn't. He folded the paper and put it in his jacket and walked back toward the exit. Manny Reyes arrived at the facility at 11. He did not come willingly. He came with Marco's hand on his elbow and the particular understanding that the hand on his elbow was one of the more favorable options available to him at this moment. And he came with the expression of a man who has been calculating his position for the last several hours and has arrived at the uncomfortable conclusion that his position is very poor. He was 31 years old and had been with the organization for 6 years, and he had one of those faces that had not finished deciding what kind of face it was going to be. Still young enough to show everything, not yet worn into the legibility of a man who has made his choices and knows what they cost. Dario sat across from him at the metal table in the supply room, and he did not speak for a long moment after Marco closed the door. Manny broke first. "I didn't know," he said. "Whatever you think I knew, I didn't know." "What do you think I think you knew?" About whatever happened with Nico. About the facility." He wet his lips. "Marco told me to come here, and I came, and I'm trying to cooperate, all right? I'm trying to—" "Manny!" Dario set his hands flat on the table. "Stop performing cooperation and actually cooperate. When did Nico ask you to run secondaries on the Yonkers properties?" 3 weeks ago. Maybe 3.5. "Why those properties specifically?" "He said they were under-monitored, said you had expressed concern about security gaps." Manny looked at the table. "He said it came from you directly." "It didn't come from me directly." "I know that now." "What were you looking for when you ran the secondaries?" A pause. He said unusual traffic. Vehicles that didn't fit the normal pattern, visitors outside regular hours. Manny looked up. "I thought it was a standard security sweep." "Did you report to him after each check?" "Yes." "How?" "Phone. The number he gave me for facility-related communication. The burner number. The one that routed, in all probability, to a federal communication log that was currently sitting in a filing system in Lower Manhattan." "How many times did you call that number?" Dario said. "Maybe 6 times, over 3 weeks." "And every call you told him what you observed?" "Yes." Manny's voice had gone very quiet. "It was routine. There was never anything to report. It was just a parking lot and a veterinary." He stopped. His face changed. The understanding moved across it slowly, the way understanding sometimes moves when a person is assembling a picture that is worse than they were prepared for. He was monitoring this facility. He knew about this place, Dario said. I swear I did not know what I was watching." "I believe you," Dario said. He said it flatly, without warmth, but he meant it. Manny Reyes was not the problem. Manny Reyes was a $26 wrench that Nico had used and discarded. But you gave him 6 reports on this location over 3 weeks, which means he knew the pattern of this place. He knew the regular vehicles. He knew the hours. Dario looked at him. He sent me here last night. Manny blinked. The meeting with Calder's people. Nico set the location. Nico set the time. He knew I would use this facility if there was an emergency afterward, because it's off the grid and Callan is reliable. Dario stood. He was going to let me walk in here with whatever I found, and then he was going to make sure the right people knew where I was. The room was quiet. What do you want me to do? Manny said. He looked young. He looked like what he was. A young man who had made a series of ordinary decisions that had led him into the orbit of something much larger and much darker than he had understood. Tell me what you want me to do, and I'll do it. For now, Dario said, you'll stay here. You won't make any calls. You won't contact anyone. He moved to the door. And you'll think very carefully about whether there is anything else Nico asked you to do in the last 3 months that seemed routine at the time. He left Manny in the supply room and closed the door. In the hallway, Marco was waiting. The 2 men in Red Hook, Marco said quietly. I have a source in the federal system. It took some time. He paused. They cooperated, both of them, full cooperation 6 weeks ago, 2 days after they were picked up. Dario looked at the floor. So the federal case has testimony, he said. Yes. From men who know the November routing. Yes. Which means even without Nico to deliver the shipment confirmation. They may have enough, Marco said, or close enough that the November shipment pushes them over the threshold. Dario looked up. Can we move the November shipment? To when? To never. Can we pull it entirely? Marco thought. It's already in transit. The first leg is moving. If we abort mid-transit, the people on the other end, the buyers, will... I know what the buyers will do. He rubbed the back of his neck. Then we change the routing. Everything Nico knew, everything he built into his reports. We change all of it. New transit points, new timing, new personnel. He looked at Marco. Can we do that in 3 weeks? Marco's expression said what his mouth did not immediately say. Then, it will be difficult. I know it will be difficult. Some of the personnel changes will require... I know what they'll require. Dario said it without heat. I'm asking if it can be done. Marco was quiet for a moment that lasted exactly long enough to be an honest assessment. Yes, he said, it can be done. Then we start today. He was halfway down the corridor when his phone buzzed, a number he did not recognize. He stopped walking and looked at it, and something cold moved across the back of his neck. An instinct, the specific physical signal his body had developed over decades to indicate that what he was about to encounter was important in a way he was not yet equipped to understand. He answered. The voice on the other end was not a voice he knew. It was flat, professional, and it said 4 words before he could speak. We know she's alive. The corridor was very still. And Mr. Veyer, the voice continued, we'd like to talk about what happens. We know she's alive. Dario did not move. He stood in the corridor with the phone against his ear, and he listened to the quality of the silence on the other end, the background texture of it, the faint ambient sound of an indoor space, climate-controlled, quiet, the kind of quiet that belonged to an office rather than a street. Who is this? He said. My name is Agent Lena Crossfield, FBI, Lower Manhattan Field Office. A pause. Not dramatic, not designed, just the pause of someone who is being precise. I'm the case agent on a RICO investigation you're already aware of, Mr. Veyer. At least, you became aware of it approximately 5 hours ago. He did not respond to that. I'm not calling to threaten you, Crossfield said. I want to be clear about that from the start. I'm calling because the situation changed last night, and the version of events we had been operating under is no longer accurate, and I think it benefits both of us to acknowledge that. You're calling me on an unregistered number at 11 in the morning to tell me the situation changed, Dario said. And you want me to believe this is not a threat. I want you to believe it's a conversation. What you do with it is your decision. Her voice was even, unhurried. She had done this before. Nico Roland has been our informant for 3 years and 2 months. You already know that. What you may not know is that the terms of his cooperation included a specific guarantee. His testimony would be the primary evidence in our prosecution, which meant that without him, the case has structural problems. Dario said nothing. The 2 men from Red Hook cooperated, Crossfield continued. Their testimony is useful, but it's corroborating, not primary. Without Nico's testimony and his delivery of the November shipment confirmation, what we have is a case that a competent defense attorney dismantles in 3 weeks. A beat. I'm not telling you this because I want you to feel safe. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand what the actual situation is, as opposed to what you might be assuming it is. What do you want? Dario said. I want to talk about Mir and Ashford. The corridor was very still. She witnessed something in March, Crossfield said. Something that has direct bearing on this investigation. Not on the Rico case. On a separate matter that intersects with it. Something that Nico Roland was very motivated to ensure she could not testify to. A pause. She's been in the wind for 7 months. We've been trying to locate her, not to arrest her, not to use her. She's not a target. But what she witnessed involves a person other than Nico, and that person is still active. Other than Nico, Dario said. Yes. Nico was working alone. Nico was not working alone, Crossfield said, and the flatness with which he said it communicated more than the words themselves. It communicated the particular weariness of someone delivering a fact they know will cause damage and have been carrying the knowledge of for some time. Nico Roland was the internal piece. But the case was built with outside assistance, someone who provided the federal contact, structured the cooperation agreement, and has been managing Nico's relationship with this office for the last 2 years. Dario turned and put his back against the wall of the corridor. Who? He said. That's what we'd like to discuss. In person. With Ms. Ashford present, if her condition permits. A pause. I think what she heard in March was more than she's told you. I think there was a second voice on that call. He stood against the wall for a long time after the call ended. The corridor hummed. The HVAC pushed recycled air through the vents. Somewhere deeper in the facility, he could hear Marco's voice, low and businesslike, working through something on the phone. A second voice. He went through the memory of everything Miran had told him, the reconstruction of the March phone call, the words she had given him with such precision, my handler, the November routing, the case number. He went through it, and he looked at it from the outside, and he understood that she had given him what she knew. She had given him exactly what she had heard. But Crossfield was suggesting that what she had heard was not the entirety of what had happened in that back office. That there was a layer she had not reached. That the call she had walked in on the middle of was a call between 2 people. Not one person and a handler, which meant there was someone else, which meant he had killed Nico Roland, the instrument, and the hand that held the instrument was still attached to a body somewhere, still operational, still inside his world, or close enough to it to be dangerous. He pushed off the wall and went to Miran's room. She read his face before he reached the chair. She had always been able to do that, and it had always unsettled him slightly, the speed of it, the accuracy. The way she could look at him for 2 seconds and know the category and approximate severity of what was happening inside him. It was not a comfortable quality in a person. It was the quality of someone who had spent a long time paying close attention to things other people did not notice. What happened? She said. He told her about the call. All of it, exactly as it had been delivered. He watched her face while he spoke, and he saw the sequence of responses move through it. Recognition, then a sharpening. Then the particular stillness that her face assumed when she was doing the fast internal work of reorganizing information. When he finished, she was quiet for almost a full minute. The back office, she said. When I came in, the door wasn't latched. Yes. And Nico was already in the middle of the call. She looked at the wall. I heard him say, my handler. I assumed he was speaking to the federal contact. But the call was already in progress when I arrived. I don't know how long it had been going. She was still looking at the wall, and her expression was the expression of someone listening to a recording in their head, trying to hear something underneath the words they had already memorized. He said, my handler wants confirmation. He was telling someone else that his handler wanted confirmation. The room went very quiet. He was on the call with an intermediary, Dario said. Not with the federal contact directly, with whoever was managing the relationship between him and the federal contact. She turned and looked at Dario. Someone who ran the connection. Someone who kept Nico's hands clean enough that his cooperation wouldn't be traceable back to whoever orchestrated it. Crossfield said the outside person provided the federal contact, structured the cooperation agreement. Dario leaned forward, elbows on knees. Think about who in March had access to Nico, who he would have taken a call from that he did not consider a risk, who could sit in that office with him while he spoke to the federal case without Nico worrying about the exposure. Mirren looked at him. He could see the moment it happened. The moment the thing she had been keeping at a distance, the thing she had been refusing to assemble because the assembled version was too destructive, came together in her mind with the force of something that had always been true and had only been waiting to be seen. Her face did not collapse. That was the thing about Mirren. Her face did not collapse. It went still in a different way, a harder way, the stillness of someone absorbing an impact without going down. How long has Bruno Calder been using the same transit points we use? She said. Dario stopped. The Red Hook operation, she said. Who set up the initial Red Hook infrastructure? 3 years ago. The expansion of the Red Hook operation, the transit point restructuring, the new partnerships in the lower harbor. He had tasked Nico with finding complementary operations that could share infrastructure costs. Nico had identified Bruno Calder's logistics network as a natural fit. He had presented it as an efficiency gain, and Dario had approved it. And for 3 years, the two organizations had shared certain transit infrastructure with the understanding that neither would compromise the other's operations. For 3 years, Bruno Calder had known the November routing. He set it up, Dario said. He said it very quietly. Bruno didn't just benefit from it. He built it. He found Nico. He structured the federal contact. He was the outside piece. The meeting last night, Mirren said. Calder's people denying everything about the Red Hook disappearances. They knew exactly what happened to those men. They handed them to Crossfield's office. Not Nico, Bruno. He stood. The chair scraped back. The whole thing, the whole 3 years. Bruno Calder built a case against me using my own underboss and my own infrastructure and sat across a table from my representatives last night and denied everything while Nico was supposed to be sending me to this facility so they could finish it. But Nico is dead, Mirren said, and Crossfield just told me the case has structural problems without him. He was moving now, pacing the small space between the bed and the wall, not with agitation but with the focused energy of a man running through implications at speed. Which means Bruno Calder's plan just collapsed. Which means he knows it collapsed, because by now he knows Nico missed his morning check-in. By now he knows something went wrong. What does he do when he knows something went wrong? Dario stopped pacing. He runs, he said, or he moves up the timeline and does something he wasn't supposed to do yet. His phone was already in his hand. He called Marco, and Marco answered on the first ring. Bruno Calder, Dario said. Where is he right now, today? Where does he spend his mornings? His standing Tuesday is breakfast at a place in Carroll Gardens, Marco said. He's usually there until 10:30, then his office in Red Hook until it's 11:15. Then he's at the Red Hook office. Get eyes on the office, now. And I need to know if he's made any calls in the last 2 hours to numbers outside his normal pattern. He paused. Also Marco, Agent Lena Crossfield, FBI Lower Manhattan. Find out everything you can about her case involvement. I need to know if her call to me was authorized or if she was working outside her own channels. That second thing will take time. Then start now. He ended the call and looked at Mirren. She was watching him with the same focused attention she had been watching him with since last night, the attention of someone who has been alone with a problem for 7 months and is now recalibrating to having a partner in it. You're thinking about whether to meet with Crossfield, she said. I'm thinking about whether Crossfield's call was what she said it was. What else would it be? A way to confirm you were alive and locate you. He sat back down. She said she knew you were alive. She didn't say how she knew. Mirren was quiet. If Bruno told her, Dario said, if he's managing that relationship tightly enough that he feeds her information about you as leverage against the investigation going sideways, then her call to me is not an opening for negotiation. It's a way to get your location. But you didn't give her a location. No, but I answered on a phone that has a signal. Mirren looked at the door. Then she looked back at him. Is this facility compromised? Manny Reyes gave Nico 6 reports on it over 3 weeks. He said it directly because there was no version of this conversation where it helped to soften the information. Nico knew the pattern. He may have given Bruno the address. May have. There's no certainty either way. But you're not willing to risk it. No. He was already standing. Callan can set up a secondary location. There's a place in... The sound was not loud. It was a specific contained sound, the kind of sound that a building makes when something outside it changes very suddenly. A pressure differential. A shift in the air. The kind of thing that the body registers before the mind identifies it. Then every light in the facility went out. The darkness was total. Underground, no windows in this corridor, no ambient light from anywhere. Total black. Dario was moving before the darkness had finished settling. He had the layout of the building in his body from years of coming here, the number of steps between positions, the location of every door, and he moved through the dark without hesitation toward Mirren's room, reaching the door frame by count, and feel, and going through it. Don't move, he said into the darkness. I'm not moving, she said. Her voice was in front of him, 2 feet, and he reached out and found her arm, and she gripped his wrist with both hands, her grip much stronger than it had been last night. The emergency generator should trip in 40 seconds, he said. Callan has a protocol. What if someone got to the generator? He didn't answer that. 38 seconds later, the emergency lights came on. Low, red-tinted, the kind that existed to allow movement rather than work. The room resolved around them in dim crimson shapes, Mirren on the bed with her hands around his wrist, the IV pole casting a thin shadow, the monitoring equipment dark and silent. His phone had no signal. He checked it twice. Nothing. Not reduced signal, not 1 bar, complete absence, which meant the signal was being jammed, which meant this was not a power outage. Someone had cut the external power and deployed a jamming unit simultaneously, which was a coordinated action that required more than one person and more than opportunism. This was a move. He went to the door and looked into the corridor. The emergency lighting stretched away in both directions in that same low red, and he could see the supply room door, the closed door of Callan's office, the far end where the corridor turned toward the exit and the secondary stairwell. Nothing moved. But the silence had a different quality now. Not the silence of a facility working quietly, the silence of something held. He heard a footstep from the far end of the corridor. 1 footstep, then nothing, then the very careful sound of someone who has just remembered to be careful. He turned back to Mirren. Under the bed, he said. Now. I can't. You can. On your side slowly, and stay there until I come back for you. He held her gaze in the red light. If I don't come back, Callan has a secondary exit behind the pharmaceutical cabinet at the back of the storage room. Push the cabinet left. There are 14 steps up to a hatch that opens in the parking lot. Dario? 14 steps. Hatch opens to the right. He let go of her arm. Go. She went. Slowly, carefully, with the IV line disconnected and her arm pressed against her ribs, she lowered herself from the bed and folded her body to the floor with the same grim deliberateness she had been applying to surviving for 7 months. She went under the bed and he watched until she was in, until all he could see of her was the pale shape of her face looking back at him from the dark beneath the frame. Stay quiet, he said. He left the room. In the corridor, he moved close to the wall and he moved fast, toward the sound he had heard, toward the end of the corridor where it turned. His own gun was in his hand without him having made a conscious decision to draw it. The grip was familiar and solid, and he kept his finger outside the trigger guard, and he moved through the red-lit underground in the silence of a man who has been moving through dangerous spaces for 30 years and has made peace with what that requires. He reached the corner and stopped, pressed himself against the wall, listened. 2 men. He could hear 2 distinct patterns of breath and movement, one closer, one further back, covering the first. Professionals. Not the disorganized muscle from the alley last night. The way they moved said training, said discipline, said this was not their first entry of this kind. Bruno Calder did not use amateurs. He looked back down the corridor toward Mirren's room. 14 steps. Hatch opens to the right. She knew. She was capable. She had demonstrated that comprehensively. If he could hold the corridor long enough for her to reach the exit, she could get out. She could get to the surface, to the parking lot, to the street, alone. 33 weeks pregnant, cracked ribs, no phone. He thought about that for exactly 1 second. Then he heard Marco's voice from somewhere above, from the surface, muffled, urgent, and he heard one of the two men in the corridor say something sharp and clipped in response, and he understood that Marco was outside and had not yet breached the facility and did not know what was happening below, and the two men inside had just learned that there was activity on the surface, which meant their window was closing and they were going to stop being patient about it. He heard the first man start moving. He came around the corner and he came low, and the first man was 3 feet away and had his weapon raised, and the shot went into the wall where Dario's head had been, and Dario moved inside the man's arm, and the second shot did not happen. The second man was further back, like he had read, and the second man had an angle, and the angle was good, and Dario was out of position, and he understood in the flat, factual way that the body understands things during these moments that he was in a very bad situation, specifically that the second man could take the shot and had chosen not to, which meant the second man had instructions to take him alive, which was in some ways worse. "Drop it," the second man said. Dario did not drop it. "Mr. Veyer." The second man's voice was controlled, unhurried. He was standing at the far end of the corridor with a weapon trained, and he had the posture of someone who could hold that position for a long time. "Mr. Calder would like to speak with you." The first man was on the floor, not moving. The corridor smelled of gunpowder and recycled air. "Mr. Calder," Dario said. "Yes, sir." "Bruno Calder sent 2 men into my physician's facility at 11 in the morning to collect me. He sent us to bring you in for a conversation. And the woman in the room at the end of the corridor." A pause. "Her as well." Dario looked at the man. In the red emergency lighting, the man's face was half shadow, professional, not cruel. The face of someone executing an assignment, not someone who had made the assignment. He was perhaps 35. Good equipment, good position. The kind of man who Bruno Calder paid well for specifically because they could be put in situations like this, and they did not improvise beyond their instructions. "Does Calder know about the federal case?" Dario said. The man blinked. One blink, involuntary. The tell of a man who has been asked something he did not expect to be asked. "Does he know," Dario said, "that Crossfield's case collapses without Nico's testimony? Does he know that what he built is already coming apart?" He watched the man's face. "Or did he send you here because he's panicking, and panicking men make moves like this?" "I have my instructions," the man said. "You have instructions from a man whose 3-year plan collapsed this morning." Dario took one careful step forward. The plan was RICO. Full prosecution. Freeze the assets, seize the properties, take down the organization. That was the plan. That plan is now structurally compromised, which means Bruno Calder is running on improvisation. And men who are running on improvisation send people like you into facilities like this one, and it ends the same way every time. The man's weapon did not waver. But something in his face did, something very small, the thing that happens to professionals when they begin to calculate whether their principal's judgment is as sound as it was when they took the assignment. "Drop your weapon," the man said, "and come with me." "Or," Dario said, and in the moment he said it, the emergency lighting went full. Not the red emergency strip, but the actual overhead fluorescents, all of them, flooding the corridor with white light. And in that sudden brightness, he could see Marco at the far end of the corridor behind the second man, with a gun pressed to the base of the second man's skull, and the absolute stillness of someone who has been in position for longer than anyone realized, and has been waiting for exactly this moment. The second man understood his position. He lowered his weapon. Dario crossed the corridor in 4 steps and took the weapon out of the man's hand, and he looked at Marco over the man's shoulder. "Power's back," Marco said. "Generator was cut from outside. I rerouted through the secondary panel." He looked at the man in front of him with the flat professional assessment of someone cataloging a problem. "There's a third one on the surface. We have him." "Alive," Dario said. "Yes." "Good." He looked at the man whose weapon he was now holding. "You're going to call Bruno Calder. You're going to tell him the collection was unsuccessful and you need new instructions. And you're going to do it in front of me, on speaker, right now." The man said nothing. You can do that, Dario said. Or you can go into the supply room with Marco, and we can have a much longer and less comfortable conversation about what Bruno told you before he sent you here. He held the man's gaze. Your choice. But make it fast. The man made it fast. He made the call. And Bruno Calder answered on the second ring, and his voice when he answered was the voice of a man who had not yet learned to be afraid. And that was the thing about Bruno Calder that had always been both his greatest asset and the seed of every mistake he had ever made. He had never learned to be afraid at the right moment. And so he answered the phone, and he said the words he said, and Dario stood in the white-lit corridor of Callan's underground facility with the phone between them and listened to Bruno Calder say, in that unhurried, confident voice, "Tell me you have both of them. Tell me the woman is... Tell me you have both of them. Tell me the woman is..." Dario took the phone. He did it in one motion, pulling it from the space between them before the man could react, and he held it flat in his palm with the speaker open, and he said nothing for a moment. Just let the silence sit there. Let Bruno Calder hear it and understand what the silence meant. "Bruno," he said. The line went very quiet. Not dead. He could hear breathing, the faint atmospheric texture of a room on the other end. Bruno Calder was there. Bruno Calder was processing. And Bruno Calder, to his credit, did not make any of the reflexive noises that smaller men made when caught, did not stammer, did not deny, did not try to construct an explanation in real time. He simply breathed, and the breathing said that he was thinking, and the thinking took approximately 4 seconds. "Dario," Bruno said. "Your men are with me," Dario said. "All 3 of them. They're fine. I want you to know they're fine, because I want you to understand that this is not retaliation. Not yet." He kept his voice level, almost conversational. "This is me telling you that you have one opportunity to correct the direction of the next 24 hours. And what direction is that? You're going to come to me, in person, alone." He paused. "Not your office, not your territory, a location of my choosing, and you're going to come without any of the people who have been helping you manage the crossfield relationship, and you're going to come in the next 2 hours." A longer silence. "And if I don't," Bruno said, "then I stop being interested in conversations, and I become interested in something else." He said it without heat. "You know what that something else looks like. You've seen it before. You're not in a position to..." "Bruno," he said the name quietly. "Nico is dead. Your federal case has no primary witness. The 2 men from Red Hook cooperated 6 weeks ago, and their testimony is corroborating at best, which your attorney will have told you already. The November shipment is being rerouted as we speak." He watched Marco move the 2 men down the corridor toward the supply room with the practiced efficiency of someone tidying a workspace. "What position do you think I'm not in?" The silence this time was different. It had the texture of a man standing at the edge of something and looking down. 2 hours, Bruno said. "Yes." "Where?" The location was a warehouse in Port Morris that belonged, on paper, to a commercial refrigeration company that had not operated in 4 years. Dario had used it twice before for meetings that needed to happen outside the architecture of normal Veyer operations. It had no connection to any name in the organization's documented structure. It had no surveillance history, and it had 3 exits that Dario had personally mapped. He sent Marco ahead with 4 men to prepare it. He had 3 hours, not 2. He had told Bruno 2 because 2 created urgency, and urgency was pressure, and pressure was useful. And he used the first hour to go back to Mirren. She was not under the bed. She was sitting on the edge of it with her feet on the floor and the IV line reattached and her hands in her lap, and she was watching the door when he came through it, and the look on her face was the look of a woman who has made a decision and is waiting to deliver it. "Don't," he said, because he could read the look. "I'm coming with you." "No." "Dario, you are 33 weeks pregnant with cracked ribs, and you have been stable for less than 12 hours. He came to the bed and crouched in front of her so their eyes were level. "You're not coming." "Bruno Calder knows I'm alive. His men came here looking for me specifically. Wherever Callan moves me, if Bruno has the address of this facility, he may have other addresses." She held his gaze. "I am not safe anywhere you are not. That's the fact. So the math is the same wherever I am. The math is not the same in a warehouse in Port Morris. What is Bruno going to do that he hasn't already done? I don't know, Dario said. That's the problem. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked down at her hands in her lap, and she flexed them slowly, the careful, deliberate movement of someone taking inventory of what their body can and cannot do. I heard something else, she said. He went still. On the call. In March. The second voice. She looked up. I've been sitting here going through it, and there was a moment, before I understood what I was hearing, before I stopped moving and stood still, there was a moment when I heard a second voice say something. One sentence. She paused. I buried it. 7 months ago, I heard it, and I buried it because everything else was so loud that one sentence didn't have room. What was the sentence? Nico said something about the timing. He said the timeline was dependent on the Weyer estate documentation, and the second voice said, she stopped, started again. The estate documents are handled. Ferretti signed them last week. Dario did not move. Sal Ferretti, she said. Not Ferretti the organization, Sal specifically. The second voice said Sal signed the estate documents. She watched Dario's face. What estate documents? His mouth had gone dry. The Weyer estate in the Hamptons. 12 acres, the main house, the guest structures, the private dock. Held in a corporate trust structure that Sal Ferretti managed through the legitimate real estate holding company, managed and maintained and renewed every year, the documentation cycling through Sal's desk as a matter of routine. If those documents had been modified, if the trust structure had been quietly altered over the course of the last year, the ownership redirected, the beneficiary changed, not obviously, not in a way that would surface in a routine review, but structurally, fundamentally, in the way that a careful man with 30 years of legitimate real estate experience could restructure a document without anyone noticing until someone looked very hard. The estate was the only Weyer asset held entirely outside the organization's operational structure. It was the one thing that a RICO seizure could not easily touch, because it had no documented connection to the criminal enterprise. It was clean. It had always been clean. Unless it wasn't anymore. Unless Sal Ferretti had spent the last year quietly making it dirty. He's been here, Dario said. Sal. He's been here for the last hour in the other room going through the Westchester documents. Mirren said nothing. He stood up. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame, and he stood there for a moment with his back to her, and he breathed. The specific breathing of a man holding something down that does not want to stay down. Sal Ferretti. 63 years old, 30 years. The man who had built the legitimate face of everything. Who had sat across tables from city officials and bank officers and real estate attorneys and had made the Weyer name respectable in every room where respectability mattered. The man who had called this morning with the voice of a concerned colleague. Who had come to the facility alone, as instructed, and who was currently 40 feet away going through documents that Dario had asked him to review. He turned around. Stay here, he said to Mirren. Dario. Stay here. He said it once more, not hard, just final, the voice he used when the decision was made and the conversation was over. Then he went down the corridor. Book it. Sal was at the table in the secondary examination room with the documents spread in front of him and his reading glasses on and a pen in his hand, and he looked up when Dario came in with the expression of a man who has been concentrating and is mildly interrupted. I'm about halfway through, Sal said. The routing adjustments are significant, but some of them may have legitimate... The Hamptons estate, Dario said. Sal's hand with the pen stopped moving. The trust documentation. Last year. Dario came to the table and he stood across from Sal and he put both hands flat on the surface. Walk me through the renewal. The annual renewal is routine. It goes through my office every... Walk me through it. Sal set the pen down. He took his glasses off and folded them with the deliberate care of a man buying himself 2 seconds. Then he looked at Dario with the eyes of a man who has known this moment was coming and has been rehearsing for it and has discovered that the rehearsal was insufficient. It's complicated, Sal said. Simplify it. Bruno approached me 14 months ago. He said it quietly, without embellishment. The voice of a man who has passed the point where embellishment is useful. He had documentation. Things from the early years, things that connected my name to specific transactions that I had believed were sufficiently insulated. A pause. They were not sufficiently insulated. He blackmailed you. He offered me an arrangement. Sal's jaw tightened. I know how that sounds. It sounds like blackmail. It was survivable blackmail. What he asked for was limited: the estate documentation, the trust restructuring. He wanted a clean asset that could be transferred cleanly if the RICO case succeeded, something that would survive the seizure because it was technically held outside the criminal enterprise structure. He looked at Dario. He wasn't asking me to do anything to hurt you directly. He was asking me to move paper. He was asking you to steal the estate. He was asking me to structure it so that in the event of a federal seizure, Sal. Dario's voice came out very quiet. The table was solid under his hands, and he pressed them flat against it, and he looked at Sal Ferretti, 63 years old, 30 years, the man who had built the clean face of everything. Did you do it? The silence lasted long enough to be an answer by itself. Yes, Sal said. The words sat in the room. Dario straightened up. He took his hands off the table. He looked at Sal for a moment with the specific quality of attention that comes when a person is memorizing something, fixing it in place, making sure it is real and not a thing the mind has constructed. Then he turned and walked to the door. Dario. Sal's voice was rough, stripped of the composed quality it usually carried. What I did, it was to protect my family. I have a daughter, grandchildren. What Bruno had on me would have... I know what it would have done, Dario said, without turning around. Then you understand. I understand perfectly. He stopped in the doorway. You had a choice between protecting your family and protecting mine. You chose yours. He looked back over his shoulder. I'm not going to tell you that was wrong. I'm going to tell you that it changes what comes next. He walked out. The warehouse in Port Morris smelled of cold concrete and old machinery, and the specific industrial emptiness of a space that had not been used for its intended purpose in years. Marco had set up a table near the center of the main floor, 2 chairs, a pair of work lights on stands that pushed back the dark without eliminating it, the shadows pooling in the high corners where the ceiling girders crossed. Bruno Calder arrived 8 minutes late. He came through the side door, the one Marco had unlocked for him, and he came alone. Dario had told him alone and he had honored it, which said something about his current state of calculation. Bruno Calder did not honor conditions he did not have to honor. The fact that he had come alone said he had assessed the situation and determined that visible force was not his best option right now. He was 60 years old, built lean, with the particular physical economy of a man who had grown up with very little and had made a philosophy out of using nothing more than necessary. He wore a dark coat, no tie, and his face in the work light was the face of a man who had already had a long day. He sat down across from Dario without being invited. He looked at the table between them for a moment, then looked up. "The woman is alive," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." "And she heard the march call?" "Yes." "And you've spoken to Crossfield?" "Yes." Dario leaned back in his chair. "You want to know how much I know before you decide how to play this. I'll save you the time. I know about Nico and the federal case. I know about the November routing. I know about the Red Hook men. I know about the estate documentation and Sal Ferretti." He watched Bruno's face. "I know you built it, the whole structure. You found Nico. You provided the federal contact. You managed the Crossfield relationship. And you plan to use a RICO conviction to eliminate my organization while the estate transferred cleanly to an entity you controlled." Bruno said nothing. "What I don't know," Dario said, "is why. You know why. I know the operational reason. I want the real one." Bruno looked at him. In the work light, his eyes were very still, the eyes of a man who has been in enough rooms like this one to have achieved a certain equanimity about them. "Your father took 3 years of my life," he said. "Not this." He stopped, started again. "Before you. Before you were running anything. Your father took a contract that was mine, destroyed the relationships I had built for 6 years to build it, and used his name to close every door I tried to open for the next 3 years. He said it without heat. The absence of heat was more concerning than heat would have been. I watched you inherit what he built, and I spent 15 years deciding what to do about it. And what you decided was to use a federal investigation. What I decided was to be patient, Bruno set his hands on the table, palms down. I didn't want blood. Blood draws attention. Blood creates enemies and investigations and problems that compound. I wanted to use the system. I wanted to build a case that was legal and legitimate and airtight and watch everything your father built get dismantled by the government that your father spent 40 years avoiding. He looked at Dario. It was elegant. It was almost elegant, Dario said. A woman heard a phone call. A woman heard a phone call, Bruno agreed. And now the case is gone. Nico is gone. Your inside piece is gone. Dario leaned forward. So what do you want from this meeting, Bruno? Because you came here alone and you came here on time, and that tells me you want something other than a confrontation. Bruno looked at the table. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, the estate documents. What Sal did, I want you to know that I did not intend for it to activate. It was insurance. It was a mechanism to be used only if the prosecution succeeded. He looked up. It doesn't need to be a problem. You're offering to reverse it. I'm offering to make it as though it never happened. Sal can undo everything he structured. The documentation returns to its original state. The trust reverts. He held Dario's gaze. In exchange for a conversation about what comes next. What comes next? The Red Hook infrastructure. We still share it. That relationship was the only real piece of the last 3 years that was not built on deception. It was a legitimate operational arrangement that served both our interests. He paused. I'm suggesting we separate the infrastructure question from everything else and treat it as what it actually is. You're suggesting we continue doing business. I'm suggesting we acknowledge that the alternative is a war that damages both of us significantly and benefits the people who are already building cases against us both. He said it practically, without apology. Crossfield's case against you is compromised, but she has resources, and she has direction, and she will rebuild. She will find another angle. A conflict between our organizations right now gives her the angle. Dario looked at him. Bruno Calder had spent 15 years building a mechanism to destroy him, and he was sitting across a table in a Port Morris warehouse offering a business proposition. And the proposition was not wrong. That was the most difficult part. The proposition was not strategically wrong. A war served nobody. A war while Crossfield was looking for new leverage was actively dangerous. His son was 33 weeks along. His son was alive and stubborn and healthy, according to the woman who had spent 7 months keeping him that way in the cold. He thought about that. He let himself think about it specifically. Then he said, the Sal Ferretti documentation is reversed, completely, in the next 48 hours, verified by my people. Agreed. The Red Hook men, the 2 in federal custody. You're going to use your Crossfield relationship to pull their cooperation agreement. Bruno blinked. That's not, you built the relationship. You manage it. You find a way. Dario's voice did not rise. If you can't, then the conversation we're having right now becomes a different kind of conversation. Bruno looked at him for a long moment. That will take time. You have 2 weeks. 3. 2.5. Bruno breathed out slowly. All right. And the 3 men you sent to the Yonkers facility this morning. Dario looked at him steadily. You understand that those men cannot go back to work for you. The silence stretched. I understand, Bruno said. Good. Dario stood. Then we don't have anything else to talk about tonight. Bruno stood as well. He straightened his coat. He looked at Dario across the table with the expression of a man who has negotiated his way out of a corner and is deciding how to feel about the price. The woman, Bruno said. Mirren, is she? She's not your concern, Dario said. I want you to know that what happened to her, what Nico did. Bruno. Dario came around the table and he stopped 1 foot in front of Bruno Calder, and he looked at the man at close range, in the flat work light, without any of the distance that the table had provided. Don't tell me what Nico did. Don't tell me what you intended. Don't tell me what the original plan was or wasn't. He held the man's gaze. She spent 7 months in the cold because of a structure you built. That's what's real. Everything else is architecture. Bruno said nothing. Get the documentation reversed, Dario said, and get out of my warehouse. Bruno Calder left through the side door, and his footsteps faded across the concrete, and then the door closed and the warehouse was still. Marco came out of the shadows at the far end of the space. He had been there the whole time, which was how it was supposed to work. He walked to the table and he looked at the two empty chairs, and he said nothing for a moment. "Do you trust it?" he said. "No," Dario said. "Then why?" "Because the deal is real, even if the trust isn't. He needs the infrastructure as much as we do. He needs the cross-field pressure reduced as much as we do." He looked at the side door. "And he knows now that the woman is alive and she's a witness, and if anything happens to her, what she witnessed becomes relevant to federal prosecutors in a way that is very bad for Bruno Calder specifically." "She's leverage," Marco said. "She's more than leverage." Dario picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. "But she's also leverage." "Yes." His phone buzzed. He looked at it. The signal had returned when they'd left the facility, and the number on the screen was Callan's facility line, and he answered it before the second buzz had finished. Callan's voice was steady, which was what it always was, but underneath the steadiness there was a tightness that Dario had never heard before in 9 years of working with the man. "You need to come back," Callan said. "What happened?" "Nothing catastrophic. The baby is fine." A pause, the kind that contained information the speaker was organizing. "But Mirren's blood pressure dropped in the last 40 minutes, and she's showing early signs of preterm labor. It may not progress. These things frequently don't progress. But I need you here, and I need you to understand that the situation has a timeline that is no longer entirely ours to manage." Dario was already moving toward the exit. "How long?" he said. "If it progresses—" Callan stopped. "Come now. That's all I can tell you. Come." He drove back to Yonkers in 17 minutes. He did not remember most of those 17 minutes afterward. He remembered the bridge, the way the lights of it streaked in the wet windshield, and he remembered his hands on the wheel, and he remembered the specific quality of the silence in the car. Not peaceful silence, not the silence of a man at rest, but the silence of a man who has compacted everything down to a single point, who has taken all the complexity of the last 20 hours and pressed it into one direction, one address, one door at the end of a corridor. Marco drove. Dario sat in the back and he did not speak, and Marco did not offer anything to fill the silence, because Marco had worked with him long enough to understand the difference between a silence that needed breaking and a silence that was doing necessary work. He called Callan once, at the 12-minute mark. "Still early," Callan said. "The contractions are irregular. Her blood pressure is coming back up." A pause. "She's asking for you." 2 minutes, Dario said. "She's also asking me not to tell you she's asking for you. So if you could receive that information with appropriate discretion." 2 minutes, Dario said again, and ended the call. She was not in the bed when he came through the door. She was standing at the narrow window, the high ground-level window that looked out at the parking lot, with one hand pressed flat against the glass and the other arm wrapped around her belly in the posture he had come to recognize as her default position, the instinctive shielding that she had been performing for 7 months, and that had become part of the architecture of how she held herself. The emergency lighting was off, the overhead fluorescents were back, and in that white light she looked different than she had looked in the red dark of the crisis. More present, more herself. The gauntness of her face still there, but carrying a different weight now. The weight of someone who has come through something and is still processing the fact of having come through it. She heard him come in and she did not turn immediately. She kept her eyes on the parking lot. "He was trying to come early," she said. "Callan said the contractions are irregular. They've been slowing." She turned then, and she looked at him with the direct, assessing look that he had been on the receiving end of for 4 years and that he had missed, specifically, concretely, as a physical absence in his daily life. "Callan thinks we have time, but he wants me on full bed rest. He wants to move me to a proper hospital facility in the next 12 hours. Wherever he thinks is safest. He thinks Westchester Medical, private ward. He has a colleague on staff." She looked at him. "He also thinks the stress of the last 20 hours is a contributing factor." "I know. I'm not saying that as an accusation. I know that too." She moved back to this bed and she sat on the edge of it with the careful deliberateness that had replaced what used to be the easy physical confidence he remembered. That would come back, he thought, or something like it would come back. The body rebuilt itself when it was given the conditions to rebuild. And she put her hands in her lap. "Tell me what happened with Bruno," she said. He told her. All of it. The warehouse, the conversation, the terms, the absence of trust underneath the presence of agreement. He told it straight through without editorializing, and she listened without interrupting, which was how she had always listened when the information was important. The complete, still attention. Nothing leaking out through her expression until she had the whole picture. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "He'll honor it," she said. "Some of it. The documentation. He'll reverse the documentation because the alternative is that I testify about the second voice on the March call, and that connects him directly to the federal case in a way that Crossfield has to act on regardless of what she wants." She looked at her hands. "He knows that. He's not stupid." "No, he's not stupid. The Red Hook men. The cooperation agreement." She paused. "That one he'll try to slow. He'll give you the 2.5 weeks, and at the end of it, he'll have a reason why it needs more time, and then more time after that." "I know. So what do you do about it?" He pulled the chair to the bed and sat. "Crossfield called me because the case is compromised. But she called me, which means she's open to something, an alternative arrangement. Not immunity. I'm not interested in that conversation, but information. I have 3 years of Nico's logs, everything he built and documented, and those logs contain names and structures that Crossfield's RICO case has been trying to reach through me. I can give her a road that goes somewhere more useful." Mirren looked at him for a long moment. "You're going to cooperate." "I'm going to negotiate," he said. "There's a difference." "Is there? Cooperating is giving them what they want. Negotiating is giving them something they want in exchange for something I need." He held her gaze. "I need the Red Hook men's cooperation agreement pulled. I need the RICO investigation formally closed, and I need a period of, not protection, space. Enough space to rebuild the organization in a form that is not what Nico helped them document. And in exchange, 3 years of logs, names above Crossfield's current ceiling, people she has been trying to reach who are not in the Veyer organization, who are adjacent to it, who intersected with it, whose names appear in Nico's documentation because Nico was thorough." He paused. "Including Bruno Calder's name, including the structure of his federal relationship, including everything that shows how the case against me was built from the outside." "You're giving her Bruno." "I'm giving her a complete picture. Bruno is part of it." He looked at the window. "It ends the case. It ends the exposure. And it puts Bruno in a position where the thing he spent 15 years building becomes the thing that takes him apart." The room was quiet for a moment. "He'll know it was you," Mirren said. "Yes. And then we're done with each other. Because the alternative for Bruno is a federal prosecution that uses his own constructed evidence against him. And the alternative for me is a rebuilt case once Crossfield finds a new angle." He looked back at her. "Sometimes the deal that neither side wants is the only deal that holds." She looked at him steadily. He could see her working through it, checking the structure of it the way she checked the structure of everything, looking for the weak points, the places where it could collapse. "It holds," she said finally. It was not enthusiastic. It was the voice of someone who has run the calculation and arrived at the answer it produces without endorsing the calculation itself. "It holds," he agreed. She nodded once. Then she put her hand on her belly in the way she did sometimes. Not the protective shield gesture. Something different. Something more deliberate, more communicative. The gesture of a woman telling someone she was in contact with something important. "He kicked," she said. "When you came through the door, he kicked." Dario looked at her hand on her belly. He looked at it for a moment. "Can I?" he said. She moved her hand and he put his there, and he felt nothing for a moment, Chet. Just the warmth of her through the thin fabric of the hospital gown, the firmness of it, the extraordinary solidity of a thing that was alive and present and real. And then the movement came. Not a kick exactly, a shift. The slow, powerful repositioning of something that was running out of room and was making its requirements known. He kept his hand there. She put her hand over his. Neither of them said anything for a while. Sal Ferretti came to the facility at 7 the following morning. He came without being asked. Dario was in Callan's office, going through the last of Nico's organizational logs, when Marco told him, and he sat with that information for a moment before he said to bring Sal in. Sal looked like he had not slept. He had the specific appearance of a man who has spent the night sitting with something heavy, the eyes slightly sunk, the skin around the jaw loose in a way it had not been the day before. He came into the office and he sat in the chair across from Dario, and he did not make any preamble. "The documentation is already in process," Sal said. "I started it last night. 48 hours, and the trust structure is back to its original state." He looked at the desk between them. "I also wrote down everything. Bruno's approach, the arrangement, every modification I made, dated and specific. It's written and signed, and it's with my personal attorney, with instructions to deliver it to you directly." Dario said nothing. "I'm not asking for anything," Sal said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for a position. I'm not asking for anything. I'm giving you what I should have given you 14 months ago, which was the truth, and I'm doing it now because it's the only thing left that I can do." He looked up. "What you do with it is your business." Dario looked at him. Sal Ferretti, 63 years old, 30 years, the man who had built the clean face of everything. He looked at him the way he had looked at Nico in the hallway, directly, without the comfort of distance, and he looked for what was actually there, underneath the guilt and the exhaustion. He found an old man who had been frightened and had made a choice from fright and had spent 14 months carrying it. "The daughter," Dario said, "the grandchildren." Sal's jaw moved. "Yes. Bruno's documentation. What he had on you? Where is it?" "My attorney has the location of the physical files. Bruno kept them in a property, and give the location to Marco. We'll handle it." He looked at Sal. "When it's handled, it's handled. There's nothing for prosecutors to find and nothing for Bruno to threaten with." He paused. "You're done with this organization, Sal. The restaurants, the real estate company, the waste management contract. You're going to step back from all of it over the next 6 months. Ordinarily, no drama, retirement age, nobody asks questions." He held the man's gaze. "And you're going to spend the time you have with your daughter and your grandchildren. And you're going to do it without looking over your shoulder. That's what I'm offering you." Sal looked at him for a long moment. His eyes were wet, and he did not try to conceal it. "Why?" he said. The word was rough, stripped to its base. "Because you have grandchildren," Dario said. "And because 30 years is 30 years. He looked at the desk. "And because being afraid of losing everything you love doesn't make you a traitor. It makes you human. I'm not in the business of destroying human beings for being human." He looked back up. "But I'm in the business of not being destroyed. So you go, and you stay gone, and we don't have this conversation again." Sal nodded. He stood. He put out his hand across the desk, and Dario looked at it for a moment, and then he took it. Westchester Medical was beige and fluorescent in the way of all hospitals, a place designed to be functional rather than felt. And the private ward on the 4th floor had a window that looked out over a parking structure, and beyond it, a thin line of trees that had gone bare with October. Mirren was moved there on the 2nd day. The contractions had stopped. Her blood pressure had stabilized. Callan's colleague, a tall woman named Dr. Ferris, who had the compressed efficiency of someone who had been delivering difficult news and complex care for 20 years, said the baby was staying put for now. Said 33 weeks was early, but not critically early. Said they would monitor and manage, and the goal was 4 more weeks minimum. Mirren said 4 more weeks was fine. She said it in the tone of a woman who had managed 7 months on the street and could manage 4 weeks in a hospital bed. Dario came every day. He came in the mornings before the organization's business began, and he came in the evenings after it ended, and sometimes in between if the day allowed it, and he brought things, food from the places she had liked, before. Small, practical things, a better pillow, a reading lamp that did not flicker. He did not make a performance of it. He brought what was useful, and he sat in the chair by the window, and they talked, or they did not talk, and both were permitted. On the 4th day, she said, "You need to sleep." "I'm sleeping." "You're not. You have the face you get when you haven't slept." She looked at him from the bed. "You've had that face for 4 days." "I've had things to do." "What things?" He told her about the Crossfield negotiation. He had met with the agent twice, once in a parking garage in Lower Manhattan, once in a coffee shop in Midtown that neither of them had any connection to, and the shape of the arrangement was becoming clear. Crossfield was a pragmatist, which was what he had assessed from the first call and what the meetings had confirmed. She wanted names above her current ceiling more than she wanted a RICO conviction that her own supervisor was already questioning the resource allocation for. She wanted the architecture of how the case had been built from the outside, because that architecture implicated people she had not been able to reach through conventional investigation. She wanted Bruno Calder in a federal proceeding with documented evidence connecting him to the manipulation of a federal informant, which was a charge that was arguably more damaging than anything in the RICO case. She was willing to trade for those things. The Red Hook cooperation agreements were formally withdrawn on day 6. The RICO investigation was suspended on day 9, with a 12-month review period that was, in practical terms, a formal closing dressed in language that allowed the agency to save face. Bruno Calder's attorney called on day 11. Dario took the call in the hospital corridor outside Miran's room, with the door closed. The attorney's name was not important. What he said was, his client wished to confirm that the estate documentation had been fully restored and that all records of the modified trust structure had been destroyed, and that his client considered the matters discussed in Port Morris to be resolved, and that his client anticipated a period of mutual non-interference going forward. Dario said he received that communication and considered it adequate. He ended the call and stood in the corridor for a moment. The hospital had its sounds: a cart moving somewhere, a distant intercom, the low ambient noise of a building full of people in various states of urgency and waiting. He stood in it and he let himself feel the weight of what had just concluded, not the satisfaction of it. There was no satisfaction, not really, not in the clean way, but the specific quality of things being finished, of accounts being settled, of a structure that had been designed to destroy him lying in pieces instead, not from heroism or from superior force, but from a woman who had survived 7 months in the cold and remembered one sentence that she had buried because everything else was too loud. He went back into the room. She looked up from the book she was reading. An actual book. A paperback that Elena had brought her. A crime novel of all things, and she had said when he raised an eyebrow that she found them calming, which said something about the last 7 months. "Done?" she said. "Done." She closed the book. She looked at him for a moment with the reading look, the inventory. Then she said, "Come here." He moved to the bed and she shifted carefully to make room, and he sat on the edge of it, close, and she put her head against his shoulder with the particular weight of someone who has been holding their own head up for a long time and has decided they do not have to anymore. Not right now. Not in this room. They sat like that. Outside the window, the trees were bare and the parking structure was gray, and the sky above it was the low white of a late October afternoon about to become evening. It was not beautiful. It was the Bronx-adjacent sky of a Westchester hospital, ordinary and particular and real. "I want to name him after nobody," Miran said. He thought about that. Meaning. Meaning not your father, not my father, not anyone we're carrying around. She was quiet for a moment. "A name that's just his." "What name?" "I've been thinking about Ellis," she said. "I don't know why. It just felt right." He said the name once, quietly, the way you say something you're testing for weight and fit. "Ellis," he said. "You hate it." "I don't hate it." "You made a face." "I was considering it. There's a difference." He felt the movement against his side, her hand repositioning over her belly, that gesture. "Ellis Weyer." She was quiet. "That's his name," she said. "That's his name," he agreed. Young. Ellis Weyer was born 31 days later, at 4:17 in the morning, at Westchester Medical Center. He was 6 pounds and 2 ounces. He arrived 3 weeks before the clinical target and 2 weeks before Dr. Ferris's cautiously optimistic projection, which was, according to Ferris, perfectly consistent with a baby who had been running out of patience for the last month. He was not quiet about it. He announced himself with a specificity and conviction that made the nurses in the room exchange a look over their masks. The look of people who have seen enough of these moments to recognize a child who has opinions. Dario was there. He had been there for 6 hours before, which was most of the labor, and he had sat in the chair and stood at the bedside and held Myron's hand when she wanted it held, and moved back when she wanted him to move back. And he had not tried to fill the space with words because the space did not need words. What it needed was presence, and presence was something he knew how to provide. When Ellis arrived and the room had done what rooms do in those moments, when the noise settled into a different kind of noise, Ferris put the baby on Miran's chest with the competent gentleness of someone who had done this 10,000 times, and still understood that each time was the first time for the people in the room. Mirren looked down at Ellis. Her face did something that Dario had no word for. It was not any of the things that people said about those moments. Not radiant, not transformed, not any of the language that got put around it. It was quieter than that. It was the face of a woman who had been carrying a promise for 7 months in conditions that were not designed to sustain promises, and the promise had been kept, and the weight of the keeping was only now, in this room, at 4:17 in the morning, beginning to lift. She looked up at Dario. He came to the bedside. He looked at Ellis. The extraordinary specific reality of him, the dark hair, the clenched fists, the face arranged in the expression of someone who has just arrived somewhere unfamiliar and is forming views about it. "He's angry," Dario said. "He gets it honestly," Mirren said. He put one finger into Ellis's fist, and the fist closed around it with the automatic fierce grip of a newborn who has not yet learned to be selective about what he holds on to. The grip was strong, unreasonably strong, the grip of something that had made it through a great deal and was not planning on letting go. Dario looked at his son's face. He looked at Mirren's face. He looked at the window where the night was still total, 4:17, the city outside dark and cold and going about its November business, entirely unaware of what had just happened in this room. He thought about the hallway in the Bronx, the alley, the cracked streetlight, a woman crouched in the filth with her arms around something she was protecting, looking at him with not relief but terror, and underneath the terror the absolute unyielding refusal to stop. "You should have come to me," he said. He said it very quietly, not as accusation. He had made peace with that question over the last 31 days, or something close to peace, but as a thing he needed to say one final time and then set down. Mirren looked at him. "I know," she said. "I know I should have, and I know why I didn't, and I know the cost of why I didn't." She looked at Ellis. "But he's here. He's here, and he's ours, and everyone who tried to stop that is handled." She paused. "That's what I have instead of the right decision." He was quiet for a moment. "It's enough," he said. "It'll have to be." "No, I mean, it's enough. It's actually enough." He looked at her. "You kept him alive. 7 months. Alone. With nothing. You kept him alive." He held her gaze. "That's not a consolation. That's the thing. That's the whole thing." She looked at him for a long time. Then she looked down at Ellis, who was still holding Dario's finger with his unreasonable grip, who had quieted from his initial announcement and was now making smaller sounds. The sounds of someone taking inventory of a new situation and finding it tentatively acceptable. "Don't let go," she said, and it was not clear who she was saying it to. Chet. The meeting of the families happened 6 weeks later in December at the Beggar estate in the Hamptons. The documentation was clean. The trust was restored. The estate sat on its 12 acres with the winter Atlantic visible from the upper windows, gray and flat and enormous. The beach stripped bare by the season, the private dock pulled up for winter. The heads of 4 families came. They came because they had been asked, and because the asking came from Dario Beggar, and because Dario Beggar did not ask twice. They came with their various faces arranged in the various expressions that men like them arranged their faces in when they were entering uncertain situations. Composed, watchful, performing ease they did not feel. Bruno Calder was not among them. Bruno Calder was navigating a federal proceeding that was, by all accounts, occupying his complete attention. The dining room of the estate held them easily. Long mahogany table, the winter light coming flat and white through the tall windows. The sound of the house settling against the December wind off the water. Dario's people had set the room without excess. No display, no theater. A table, chairs, water, and coffee. The room of a man who did not need to perform. Dario stood at the head of the table while the families settled. He did not speak immediately. He let the room find its own silence, which it did within 30 seconds, because the room understood that silence was required. Then he said, "There are things you know, and things you think you know, and things you've been told. I'm not going to sort through all of that tonight. What I'm going to do is tell you what is true and what comes next." He told them about Nico. He told them about the federal case, not all of it, enough. He told them about Bruno Calder and the structure of what had been built, and how it had come apart. He told it in the same way he told everything, direct, unembellished, without asking for sympathy or demonstrating injury. The facts, the sequence, the resolution. The men at the table listened without interruption. They were old enough and experienced enough to understand that interrupting this particular recounting would be a very poor decision. When he finished, the room was quiet. Then the door at the far end of the dining room opened. Mirren came in. She was dressed in deep green, a color she had always worn well, and she was carrying Ellis in the way she carried him now when she wanted her hands free. In a structured carrier against her chest, his head visible at the neckline, his eyes open and very dark, and looking at the room with the same taking inventory expression he had arrived with 6 weeks ago. She had gained back some of what the 7 months had taken, not all of it, perhaps not ever all of it, but enough that she moved through the doorway with the ease of someone who knew the room was looking at her and had decided the room's looking was not her problem. She walked to the head of the table. Dario moved to the side. Not behind her, beside her. The distinction was visible to everyone in the room, and it was intentional, and it communicated what it was intended to communicate. She stood at the head of the table. She looked at the men assembled there, looked at each of them, briefly, specifically, the reading look that moved across faces like a hand across a document. She had always been able to do that. She was better at it now. "I know what some of you are thinking," she said. Her voice was even, unhurried. "You're thinking about what I am and what I represent, and whether this is theater." She paused. "It's not theater. I'm standing here because I have something to say, and because the man standing next to me believes that what I have to say is worth the room's time. You should form your own view of whether he's right." No one spoke. "I lived on the street for 7 months," she said. "I lived there because a man inside this organization decided I was a problem that could be removed, and because the systems around me were controlled by that man, and because the safest thing I could do for the child I was carrying was to disappear." She said it without performance, without seeking response. "I'm telling you this not for sympathy. I'm telling you because the lesson of it is relevant to every person at this table." She looked at the table, then she looked back up. The structures we build to protect ourselves become the structures that destroy us when the wrong people are inside them. Nico Ralan was inside this organization for 29 years. Bruno Calder was inside the infrastructure of this one and 3 others for 15 years. They did what they did not through force, but through proximity, through being trusted, through being close enough to the center to redirect it without anyone seeing the redirection. She paused. "The question that matters going forward is not how we build stronger walls. It's how we think about who we let inside them." The room was very still. "This organization operates under new terms from tonight," she said. "The terms are simple. Women and children are not touched. Families are not leverage. Anyone who crosses that line answers to Dario directly, without the intermediary of a council, or a vote, or an appeal to tradition." She looked at the faces around the table. "And anyone who operates the way Nico operated, anyone who builds a private arrangement that runs against the interests of the people they serve, will be found. It may take time. It may take a very long time." She looked down briefly at Ellis, who was making one of his small inventory sounds. "But it will not take 7 months." Something moved around the table. Not agreement exactly. Recognition. The specific recognition of men who have seen a great deal and who understand, when they encounter it, the quality of someone who has been tested in ways they cannot dismiss. Carlo Metz, the oldest man at the table, 68 years old and the head of the most established family in the room, said, "What do you need from us?" Mirren looked at him. "Your word," she said, "given in this room, that the terms are understood and accepted." Carlo Metz looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Dario, and Dario looked back at him, and something passed between them that was too old and too specific to be fully articulated. Carlo Metz turned back to Mirren. "The terms are understood," he said, "and accepted." The others followed, one by one, in their own time and their own words, the room arriving at something that was not peace. Peace was the wrong word. This world did not produce peace, but settlement. The kind of settlement that comes when the cost of conflict has been made sufficiently clear and the alternative has been made sufficiently real. After the families left, the estate was quiet. The staff moved through the rooms cleaning, the low, efficient sounds of work being done. And Dario and Mirren were in the upper sitting room that faced the water, the December Atlantic running silver and gray under a moon that had come out between clouds. Ellis was asleep in the carrier, which Mirren had set on the low table in front of the window. He slept with the conviction of someone who has made a unilateral decision about the situation and is not accepting alternative input. Mirren had her feet tucked under her on the sofa and a cup of tea going cold on the side table, and she was looking at the water. Dario was in the chair nearest the window, his jacket off, the first time in several weeks he had sat in a room without a jacket on, and he was also looking at the water. Carlo Metz accepted without argument, she said. He has grandchildren. Most of them do. Men with grandchildren understand certain things differently than men without them. He looked at the water. He'll hold the word. The others will follow his lead. She was quiet for a moment. And Crossfield? The investigation is formally suspended. She has what she needs from the logs to build the Bruno case, and it's more than she had before. She's not going to reopen. He paused. She's also not going to be anyone's friend, but she's a pragmatist. She'll take the ceiling we gave her and she'll work it. And if she decides to revisit, then we'll have that conversation when we have it. He looked at her. There is no version of this life where every door is permanently closed. You know that. I know that. What I can give you is a life where the doors are managed, where we see them before they open. He held her gaze. Where no one gets inside the walls without both of us knowing. She looked at him for a moment with the reading look, the last inventory of the evening, the taking of stock. That's enough, she said. It echoed what he had said in the hospital, in the hours after Ellis arrived, and she had said it deliberately, and he knew she had said it deliberately, and neither of them said anything else about it. Ellis made a sound, not waking, not distress, the sound he made sometimes when he was deep in sleep and encountering something his new mind was processing. His hands moved, the fists opening and closing, the automatic grip and release of a child who was still deciding what to hold on to. Mirren reached out and put one finger into his fist, and the fist closed. Outside, the Atlantic moved under the moon. The beach below the estate was empty and pale in the winter dark, the water pulling at the edge of it with the slow and different rhythm of something that had been doing this for a very long time and intended to continue. The house was warm. The house was quiet. And in the morning, Dario Vare would go back to the work of managing what he had built and protecting what he had nearly lost. And Mirren would go back to the work of recovering what 7 months had taken from her body and determining what those 7 months had left behind, which was something harder than what she had been before. Not worse, just harder. The way wood is harder after fire. The way certain things only arrive through the process of almost not arriving at all. But that was the morning. Tonight the Atlantic ran silver outside the window, and Ellis slept with his fist around his mother's finger, and the house held all of it. The cost of it, the survival of it, the ordinary, extraordinary fact of 3 people in a warm room at the end of a very long road. And outside, the city they had come from was dark and cold, and entirely unaware that anything had changed. It had changed. It would not change back. And somewhere beneath the Bronx, on Arthur Avenue, the rain had returned. The cold October rain that had started everything, that had turned the gutters red and pushed a man off his route and into an alley where a woman crouched in the dark with her arms around the only thing that mattered. And it fell on the empty streets without witness, washing everything clean, the way rain always did, the way it always had, indifferent and necessary and relentless as anything that has always been true.